Hong Kong is one of the world's best managed economies. They are at the top when it comes to finance, trade, and business competitiveness. In all of these, we always see that Hong Kong is at the very top. They are a global financial hub, they are a major re-exporter, and their businesses are thriving. But there is one more where Hong Kong is thriving, and that is in the gross government debt. Here's a graph on the general government gross debt as a percentage of GDP, data from the International Monetary Fund. What this graph tells us is that Hong Kong has one of the lowest government debt levels in the world relative to its GDP. Here, as of the latest year available for 2024, the region only has a debt to GDP of just 9%. That is nowhere near any other major economy out there. It is even so much lower than China. Let's graph out some of the well-known financial hubs and their debt to GDP. Here you can see that Singapore, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and even some Middle Eastern oil-rich economies have much higher government debt to GDP than Hong Kong. So, what does this tell us? Does it mean that Hong Kong is really performing well as compared to these major financial hubs? Well, to understand why Hong Kong's government debt is so low, we must first talk about Hong Kong's economic model. Hong Kong's low-debt economy begins in its colonial past. When Hong Kong was under British rule, the administrators of the city learned early on that given Hong Kong's small size and external vulnerability, maintaining fiscal discipline was not just a matter of prudence, but of survival. What this simply means is that Hong Kong can't afford to run large deficits. These deficits, as some of you may know, happens because a government spends more money than they earn. They spend the money on, say, infrastructures and social services, but don't collect enough money from taxes. So because of Hong Kong's unique status, they can't really afford to run deficits and accumulate debt like major economies, because they don't have a diversified industry. So, instead, the Hong Kong government had to ensure that when the government spends money, it remains within its means. They don't spend too excessively like many major economies. A key figure in this legacy was Sir John Cowperthwaite, Financial Secretary from 1961 to 1971. Cowperthwaite is widely credited with establishing the philosophy of positive non-interventionism in Hong Kong's economy. He believed that the government should play only a minimal role, intervening only when absolutely necessary to allow the market to operate freely. Under his stewardship, public spending was kept low and taxation was minimized, while revenue from land sales and other sources was used to maintain robust fiscal reserves. His policies helped Hong Kong transform from one of the world's poorest places to a thriving global financial center within just a few decades. And even after Hong Kong was handed over to China in 1997, the government continued to adhere to this fiscal principle of spending within its means. To give you a graph for this, let's pull up the overall balance of Hong Kong. What this overall balance is about is a measure of the government's financial health, showing the difference between its revenue and expenditure. A positive balance means the government is running a surplus, accumulating reserves rather than debt, while a negative balance indicates a deficit, requiring borrowing or the use of reserves to cover expenses. Here you can see that from 1990 to 2024, Hong Kong had continuously been running surpluses every single year. There were years where it incurred deficits. As you can see, it occurred in the late 1990s, specifically in 1998, as that was the year when the Asian financial crisis hit. There was also a big contraction in overall balance from 7.34% in 2007 to 0.25% in 2008 due to the 2008 global financial crisis. And, as many of you know, in 2020, we saw the COVID-19 pandemic, which have unfortunately brought the overall balance of Hong Kong to unprecedented levels. But if you actually compare this overall balance to a major economy, you will get to see that Hong Kong is indeed performing well. For instance, if we were to add China to this list, we get to see that China has incurred negatives in its overall balances in nearly every single year. But if we were to add Singapore, we would see that, like Hong Kong, Singapore has maintained this disciplined approach to fiscal management, though with some key differences. Now, if we were to pull up the graph again on Hong Kong's debt to GDP, we would also see that there was actually a run-up on the debt in recent years. You can see that in the past, it was closer to 0%, but in just the past few years it has gone up. And if you're thinking it's related to the overall balance, then you're right. The COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent problems have caused Hong Kong's debt to go up, even though it's still small. Let's try to understand this one by one, so we can have a clear grasp of how this works. Let's pull up the 2017 to 2018 government revenue and expenditures. This was a year just before Hong Kong saw substantial fiscal deficits. Here you can see on the left we have the government revenues. This is how the government makes money. As you can see, a big portion of their revenues comes from profits tax, followed by salaries tax, and then land premium. In total, for that year, the government revenues was over 507.7 billion Hong Kong dollars. To the right of this graph, we have the government's expenditures. It is how the government spends money. Here, you can see that they have spendings for education, security, social welfare, and a long list of other spendings. In total, however, it is much lower than the revenues at just $491.4 billion. This means that the Hong Kong government for this year was operating at a fiscal surplus of 16.3 billion Hong Kong dollars, meaning that government revenues exceed expenditures. This surplus was in line with Hong Kong's long-standing policy of maintaining a self-sustaining budget, avoiding unnecessary borrowing, and ensuring financial stability. But if we were to pull up the graphs during the COVID-19 pandemic from the 2020 to 2021 budget, we get to see a completely different picture. Here you can see that in 3 years, Hong Kong's government revenues didn't actually go up that much. For this budget, they had only generated revenues of $572 billion. On the right, we get to see the expenditures to skyrocket massively, surpassing revenues by far. Here you can see that they have expenditures of over $731 billion. A part of this problem is the fact that Hong Kong, which was affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, saw a decline in revenues. There were businesses that were going bankrupt. People are losing their jobs, and even investment income has been affected due to the drop in asset prices. But another part for the cause is also because Hong Kong's government had continued to spend much more than they made. Some would probably argue that this was irresponsible. Why, in the face of an economic crisis, would you spend a lot of money? Well, this is what some would refer to as fiscal stimulus. Fiscal stimulus is a government strategy where increased spending and/or tax cuts are used to boost economic activity during a downturn. The idea behind fiscal stimulus is that when an economy is struggling due to a financial crisis, a pandemic, or geopolitical uncertainty, the government steps in to inject money into the system to prevent a deeper recession. Hence, Hong Kong's government debt, which had risen in just a number of years, was because of the need to stimulate the economy. The government did not want to allow its economy to decline, and instead, what they did was to borrow money. They would rather borrow money than to have their economy go down. So, before we end the video, let's talk about how Hong Kong's government borrows money. Hong Kong's government debt operates differently from that of most other economies. The government of Hong Kong issues bonds such as green bonds, infrastructure bonds, silver bonds, and general government bonds. In total, the value of all outstanding bonds is 479.9 billion Hong Kong dollars. But these bonds are all different. Green bonds, for instance, are issued under the government sustainable bond program to fund environmental projects such as clean energy, waste management, and sustainable infrastructure. The Hong Kong government, as of the third quarter of 2024, has $203 billion worth of these bonds. Infrastructure bonds, on the other hand, are used to fund large-scale public projects, such as roads, bridges, and railway systems. The government raises money through these bonds to invest in long-term urban development without relying on tax increases. These are worth $34.5 billion. Then there's silver bonds, which retail bonds designed for Hong Kong's elderly population. These bonds provide a low-risk investment option for retirees, offering stable returns while helping them manage their savings. Unlike other bonds, holders can redeem them before maturity if needed. They are worth $54.9 billion. Finally, there's the general government bonds and alternative bonds, which serve as a broader financial tool to support public finance and cash flow management. Unlike the other bond categories, they are not tied to specific projects, but instead help maintain financial stability. So, would this rise in debt to GDP of Hong Kong be a problem? Well, of course, it's very low, so obviously not. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.